Our speaker this morning is camper number 9760, Dr. Richard Bucher, who lives in Mount Airy, Maryland, about 40 miles west of Baltimore. Rich was a camper here at Dudley in the 1960s, where I'm told he was a pretty good baseball player. Hailing from Armonk, New York, he worked his way up the leadership ladder as an aide, junior leader, and in 1967 was a leader. Following his Dudley days, he graduated from Colgate University in 1971, majoring in sociology. He then earned a master's degree in sociology from NYU and a PhD from Howard University in Washington, D.C., where he focused on race and ethnic relations. Rich was the first director of Baltimore City Community College's Institute for Intercultural Understanding, a nationally recognized educational program promoting diversity and inclusion. He's also written 2 books on this same subject. In the year 2000, Rich was honored as the Maryland Professor of the Year by Carnegie Foundation for Advancement at Teaching. Rich has always been active in his community. Each year he talks to hundreds of youth and adults about the role that diversity has played in his personal and professional life. A family man and a fitness enthusiast, he has been married for 43 years to his wife Pat, who is with us today, who is also an educator. They are the proud parents of 3 children, Jimmy, Katie, and Susan. Rich recently told us, "Dudley was one of the greatest blessings of my life. It helped me to develop character and goals. I also learned some of my earliest lessons in diversity, integrity, and teamwork as a camper and leader at Camp Dudley. These lifelong lessons remain with me today." Please join me this morning in a warm Dudley welcome for Dr. Rich Bucher.
May we bow our heads in prayer. Dear Lord, may your love, your grace, and your word be proclaimed either through me or in spite of me. In your name we give thanks. Amen. What are comfort zones? Ask yourself, are you comfortable at Dudley? And I'm not just talking about your basic needs like food, shelter, clothing. I'm talking about, are you psychologically comfortable at Dudley? Do you feel like the world at Dudley is made for people like you? Do you feel like you belong, like you are welcomed here? You and I are surrounded by comfort zones. Those bubbles that we live in that make us feel safe and secure. For many of us, our comfort zone is our everyday routine, our family, our friends. Our comfort zone tends to be made up of people who look like us, talk like us, think like us, and act like us. For some of you, coming to Dudley requires you to move out of your comfort zone. Some of you are new campers. Many of you are cubs, and you're still kind of getting your feet wet and getting used to what Dudley is all about and what's expected of you. And for many of you, if you're like my daughter Susie, who sleeps with her cell phone at night, going without a mobile device for 8 weeks is pushing you way out of your comfort zone. Some of us visit our comfort zone. Some of us venture out of our comfort zone whenever we get a chance. And some of us stay locked in our comfort zone. Well, why not just stay in our comfort zone? Comfort zone's a good thing. It provides security. It provides a sense of routine, a sense of normalcy. But there are times when we choose to do things that move us out of our comfort zone, or we are actually pushed beyond what we normally do. And surprisingly, that can be a good thing too. In some ways, your leaders and coaches at Dudley want you to be comfortable. But in other ways, they want to stretch you. They want you to experience things for the first time and meet new people. Robert Putnam, a professor at Harvard University, has studied thousands of people like you and me and how we react to people from different cultures, different races, different religions, different social classes. This is what we call in sociology diversity. And what Putnam found is that when we encounter diversity, at least initially, we retreat to our comfort zones. We shy away. And to use his terminology, we hunker down. In his book, The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren, Warren states, God's ultimate goal for us is not to be comfortable. God's ultimate goal for us, rather, is character development. Life is not fair. Life is tough. Life is difficult. But it's those difficult times, at least in my life, that I've found enable us to grow. How did comfort zones impact my life once I left Dudley? Well, when I left Dudley as a leader, I had a plan. I was going to work at a business, make some decent money, raise a typical family in a typical neighborhood. However, God had a different plan for me. After graduating from Colgate University and then from New York University, I found myself teaching at Baltimore City Community College, BCCC, a predominantly African American community college. And when I was teaching, maybe a class of 35 or 40 people, typically I was the only white person in the class. BCCC serves some of the neediest and poorest students in the state of Maryland. And I remember one class I had in which I asked my students to share their goals in life. And one of my students, an African American male, I remember distinctly, he listed some of his goals and then he said, Dr. Bucher, I've already achieved one of my goals in life, and that is to live to be 25 years of age. That blew me away. Totally blew me away. Because I have lived a privileged life. I lived in the Dudley bubble, and I lived in a bubble at home. And it never once occurred to me for that to be a goal. While at BCCC, I continued my education at Howard, which is a historically black college, over 99% African American. So oftentimes I felt like I was the only white person on a campus of thousands. For me, expanding my comfort zone has been a struggle. It's been an educational struggle, a social struggle, a spiritual struggle, and an educational struggle. How has Jimmy changed my life? Like many of you, I find it easier to do the same thing over and over and over again. And for a good part of my life, my routine stayed pretty much the same. I mingled with the same people, my priorities remained the same, and my view of the future didn't change that much. But when my first child was born, all of that changed. I expected Jimmy to follow in my footsteps, He would go to Dudley. He would go to college. He would become self-sufficient and get a job. He would get married and then raise a family of his own. But God had other plans for me. I am so proud of my son. My son is 39 years old. He pushes shopping carts at Walmart, and he loves to spoil his sisters. And one of the reasons I'm so proud of Jimmy is that every day he steps out of his comfort zone. Because you see, the world that you and I live in is not made for people like Jimmy. For example, this chapel is beautiful, but it would be very difficult for Jimmy to sit where you're sitting. The wind, the distractions, the sky, the clouds, the sun, because of the way Jimmy's brain is wired, he would have an extremely difficult time blocking that out. And it would be very stressful for him. The language you and I use would be very difficult for him to understand. And he would have a very difficult time interacting with some of you. Jimmy has a hard time adjusting when his schedule changes. The fair, the big show, the Olympics, your July 4th celebration tomorrow, any deviation from Dudley's schedule would be extremely tough on him. Early in Jimmy's life, his neurologist, his brain doctor, advised us, don't treat Jimmy like a China doll. What he was saying was that he knew that we would want to overprotect Jimmy because there are people out there who are mean to Jimmy. There are people out there who want to take advantage of Jimmy. But he said, you've got to let Jimmy experience the world. You've got to let him out of his comfort zone. And that is exactly what we have done. I am currently writing a book. And it's called A Mommy, a Daddy, Two Sisters, and a Jimmy. A family grows with autism. A big part of this book revolves around his two sisters, Katie and Susie. When each of them applied to college, they were asked to write about the person in their lives who has had the biggest impact on them. Each of them chose to write about Jimmy. On our way back from a trip to James Madison University, I had just dropped off my oldest daughter. And I'm driving back, and my youngest daughter's in the back seat, and I'm kind of zoned out, listening to music, when out of the blue, my youngest daughter asks me this question. She says, Daddy, if you could, if it was possible, would you take Jimmy's disability away? I was groping for an answer. I had no answer for that. And I think Susie sensed my discomfort, and she answered her own question. And she said, people see Jimmy's disability as a disadvantage, as something you're stuck with. But I see it as more of a gift. I said to myself, wow. Jimmy has been a tremendous challenge in our lives, but he's also been a tremendous gift. He keeps us mindful of what is really important in life. And Jimmy pushes his sisters out of their comfort zone. When she was 11, Katie wrote, "Growing up with my autistic brother, I have discovered more and more about myself and other people. He has shown me that not everything wonderful seems wonderful at first sight. When you have someone so different that is so close to you, you develop an uncommon compassion for others." I am very proud of my daughters, and one of the things I'm most proud of is that they are two of the kindest people I know. They're always there for their brother, regardless. And Jimmy's approaching his 40th birthday, and for the third time, they took it upon themselves to take Jimmy to Disney World. That is a major undertaking. How did Dudley help me grow out of my comfort zone? As I look back on my years as a camper and a leader, one of the most important lessons I learned was the other fellow first. Putting the other fellow, though, pushed me out of my comfort zone. And you might say, why? Well, like many of you, I live in a culture that teaches me to put my own needs first. For example, when we achieve a goal at Dudley, like earning the camp flag, there's a tendency to think of what each of us did rather than the other people at Dudley or the other people back home and how they made this achievement possible. When I think about the Dudley motto, to me there are three parts. One, you put the other fellow first. That might mean being humble, might mean listening before speaking, or doing a favor for a camper you don't know. Number two, it does not matter if the other fellow is of a different race, has different values, is of a different age, a different ability, a different sexuality. You put the other fellow first. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. And number three, it's not enough to simply put the other fellow first and tolerate the other fellow. To me, putting the other fellow first means putting him first in your heart. And this means respecting him and being there for him. Years ago, I heard a man by the name of Herman Boone talk. For some of you, you've seen a movie that featured Herman Boone. He was featured in a movie called Remember the Titans. And Herman Boone was portrayed by Denzel Washington. And Remember the Titans is based on a true story. In 1971, two high schools in Alexandria, Virginia merged. One was black and one was white. And they were integrated as part of a government plan. Remember the Titans follows the football team's first year at T.C. Williams High School. Coach Boone wanted to create the best team possible that year. But he had a problem. The blacks lived in all black communities, and they wanted nothing to do with the white players. And the whites lived in all white communities, and they wanted nothing to do with the black players. But Coach Boone would have none of that. He demanded that his players respect one another. He said, you don't have to like each other, but you must respect each other. And the key, according to Boone, was moving them out, forcing them out of their comfort zone. If they wanted to play, Boone told them they had to spend time during training camp getting to know each and every member of the team. And if they did that, they got a star on their helmet, and they got to play. And Boone said he knew he was getting through to his players when the black and white players started cracking on each other or making fun of each other and joking. That began the process of respecting each other, and that led to a state championship in the state of Virginia. Where do we go from here? The late George Carlin once said, "We've been to the moon and back, but we have a difficult time walking across the street to greet the new neighbor." Fears can make it difficult to step outside of our comfort zone. The Martin Luther King said, "We fear each other because we don't know each other. And we don't know each other because we haven't communicated with each other." Mistrust, fear, and hate is taught. The year I was born, many, 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 many years ago, a musical came out, and it was called South Pacific. And there was a song in South Pacific called "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught." And I'd like to share just a few words from that song with you. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. Even though this song was written years ago, I think it still holds true today. Fear of people who are of a different religion, a different skin color, fear of people who have a hard time communicating with us is something that is still taught and learned. But the good news is that mistrust and fear does not make us bad people. It just means we've got a lot of work to do. For example, the Bible teaches us to be kind to the stranger and treat the other fellow first. Being kind and reaching out to the poor and the needy is part of all major religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. My challenge to you this summer is to examine not only who's in your comfort zone, but who is not, and force yourself to move out of it. Try doing something new and different. Make a friend with someone who needs friends. Pray for the person who rubs you the wrong way. And put the other fellow first, even when that person is the last person you want to put first. And then think back to what you learned from doing that. The more you can do that, the more you will grow this summer. The more your skills, your character will develop, and the more you will make it possible for other people at Camp Dudley to grow and enjoy their summer. May we bow our heads. Dear Lord, help us to walk the talk at Dudley and actually put the other fellow first, especially when it is difficult to do this. Help us to remember that we need to move outside of our comfort zone with your help. And as we pray, help us to remember that in your eyes, we are all the same, We are all your children, and we are all precious. In your name we give thanks. Amen.
Let's stand and sing our closing hymn, which is found in your worship insert, Let There Be Peace on Earth.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine His light upon each of you. And may the Lord help you move outside of your comfort zone as you put the other fellow first. Amen.